Oh, I'm sorry, we talked about recording and then I forgot to push the button. So I just did. So I hope everyone is comfortable with being recorded. If you're not, say so, because we don't have to. Julian, are you still typing? Press the enter key, I think. You forgot to do that. There you are. Okay.
All right. It says, what Terry said resonates with me, and I think the idea of that which passes all understanding sums it up nicely for me. That says nothing about it being inside or outside, but it does capture the feeling that reason can't capture it. I'm going to share the screen again because I think some people didn't see the queries. And you're free to share, friends, on whichever of those queries you want to share on, or all of them. Of course, not all at once if you don't have it all right there.
Well, in that case, I was stopped by the first one, but the next two I think I could deal with. I remember when I was studying computer science, I've been studying it for several years. And I remember this was, I studied it at various different venues, but I ended up studying it at the University of Texas at Austin. And I remember walking down the sidewalk in front of Painter Hall and suddenly realized that I had mastered the subject. And suddenly a column of black smoke came out of the left side of my head, and a column of white light came out of the right side of my head. And that was the first tangible experience I had with the light. I noticed that the light was accompanied by black smoke. And I think that's what the light is. It's both light and darkness. And then later on, when I was working for IBM, I made the mistake of not having any vacation time at Christmas time the first year. And so when I went for my 5-mile run, there was no hot water in the shower afterwards. And it was freezing. But I found that after several days, I found that if I breathed in through the top of my head and then breathed out through the rest of my body, I stayed warm all during the cold shower. And then later on, I studied some meditation techniques that were similar to that. And right before my son was born, his mother and I went down to the Children's Museum to check it out, see what it might offer for him. And there was a handheld galvanometer there. And I tried breathing in through the top of my head while I held that galvanometer, and the needle went off the scale when I breathed out through my hand. So that was another tangible experience of the light. And since then, when I hold people in the light, I've done that. I breathe in through the top of my head and out through my hand in the direction of the person I'm holding in the light.
Anyone feel free to pipe up if you want to see the queries again.
So if I had it to do over again, I would phrase the first query as, how do I experience the inner light, as opposed to what does it mean? Because the question, looking for the meaning is essentially conceptual, and it's much more important to talk about the actual experience of the inner light. For me, it's always been a matter, an understanding or an assumption that the light is energy that comes from the divine source, and it's a way for us. It's a way for spirit to reveal itself to us. Uh, in terms of what Larry was saying, I was struck by how different his method of holding people in the light is from mine. For me, it's essentially a matter of breathing consciously and repeating to myself, I bring you into my heart, and then with the out breath, I send you love and light. Um, in terms of method, when I first began to meditate, I came across a book by Thich Nhat Hanh called The Miracle of Mindfulness. And in that book, he talks about conscious breathing. And conscious breathing is slow, deep, rhythmic breathing. He talks about counting with the in-breath and counting with the out-breath. He also talks about using inspiring phrases to kind of stimulate an opening and receptivity to the divine. I've also added Sufi methods and centering prayer. For those who haven't tried it, I recommend centering prayer highly.
Kind of experience the light as a sense inside, somewhere inside, that the energy that animates me has been incorporated from that same energy which permeates the entire universe and brings life and motion and creation. And when I actually have that feeling, I sense it as both an expansion of my physical senses, especially sound and hearing, and a sense of connectedness to those who are nearby. And it happens mostly in meeting for worship, but once in a while, if I'm lucky, I can experience it during my centering prayer.
You know, there are a number of ways that friends say they experience the light, and sometimes they fall into the category of messages, that it's something that gives you a message or a leading or an understanding. It's coming to you in the way of altering your understanding. But the metaphor of the light also means that it's something that changes your perceptions at a very fundamental way. I'm sitting in a meeting, I'm looking outside, and I'm seeing the hummingbirds flying around in the bushes. And that's pretty ordinary. And then somehow all at once, I'm seeing more than that. I'm seeing the same thing, but how do you explain this? It's more than what we normally see. Hope that didn't sound too weird, but
for me, the inner light is something that I don't so much see, but I feel. It's something around me, but in me, but at the same time, inside everybody else on the planet too. So my experience of the inner light will be very different to yours, and everyone's experience of the inner light, and that's how it should be. But that's how I conceptualize it. A force very much like the Star Wars force. That's how it is for me. Something that is powerful, something dynamic, something, that creates, literally creates. And in terms of how I connect to it or how I experience it, I like to use physical light or visualize light, but at the same time, it's not light. And then with that, I just get a sense of being so much more than I am, more powerful, more relaxed. Whatever it is I am, I'm more of when I'm, when I have a sense of inner light. But yeah, it's very much an energy or a force for me.
My experience of the inner light's always been paradoxical. Um, I never see it or sense it outside my body. It's always an inner experience. Right now, primarily in the heart, but I always assume that it's coming from outside me. Um, I think it's also useful to think of it as a God within, and therefore as coming from within me. Um, I don't have the sensitivity to discern when that's happening or how it's happening, but um, for me, it's helpful to think of God or think of the light as existing and coming from the outside, but also existing within.
I hesitate to throw this in too, but it reminded me, the messages reminded me of a poem I hadn't thought about in some years, I think, but I was reading in some Buddhist writing and years ago on sitting out on the porch, and a short poem came to me, uh, seeking the light. I seek the light, but see only its reflections. I find the light and am blinded. I neither seek nor find enlightenment.
To me, the inner light sort of reminds me of the days of shortwave radio. I had a friend who was really into it. We'd sit and we'd hear these radio stations from all over the world, and you kind of wonder, like, what would the station look like? You know, maybe it's like this little hut somewhere from some town in South America, or maybe it might be from the downtown Tokyo, or who knows. But we knew that really that wasn't really what was important. What was important was getting the message and listening to it.
Julian had another message for us. He says, I experienced the light in the form of aha moments in perfectly normal everyday activities, reading, music. In the case of the former, I may suddenly understand a passage in Quaker reading or something else that I have never understood in that way before. Similarly, in music. In the case of reading, an example is the phrase, let your words be few. One day I suddenly understood the phrase with the emphasis on your, suggesting that words from another source. In the case of music, I had an experience with Iris DeMent, who sometimes sings gospel music. I was given the realization that I could substitute Quaker terminology and expressions for what I normally would associate with evangelical Christians. And the song spoke to me just as they probably did to the evangelical folks where previously I would figuratively roll my eyes. For me, there was something I think that I've always had an awareness of. And when I first started hanging out with Quakers, I then realized might be described as the inner light. Something from, I'm pretty sure, maybe even before I knew how to talk, there was a sense of an abiding silence that was not just silence and maybe anything but silence, but it was always there and it was always available. And if I would only let myself step into it or let it step into me. And it's really hard to describe otherwise. I say silence, that sounds like it's auditory, and it's not. It's more just a sense or a feeling. I think one of the queries was, an experience you've had with the inner light, a significant experience. And for me, I had an experience that might have been the inner light, but I think wasn't. And so it was kind of a negative experience. And many of you have heard me talk about the time when, I felt impelled to speak in meeting, but I didn't know what was going to come out of my mouth. I didn't even know if I was going to speak in intelligible language. And so I I didn't do it. I didn't let it happen. And that was around 20 years ago, and I still don't know what that was, or if that was some discernment that I practiced in not sharing.
So I feel led to quote from Richie Havens, freedom. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from my home. Freedom. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone, a long, long, long way from my home. I got a telephone in my bosom, and I can call him up from my heart when I need my brother, when I need my mother. Freedom.
We have a couple more minutes, friends, before we need to start settling into worship. I'm going to share the screen again in case someone has something to share.
So, while I don't think that the inner light can actually be defined, I experience it mainly in two ways. Um, One is, the first one is mainly like actually being filled with light. And when I don't practice regularly, my whole self is kind of like a dark, cluttered attic. It's filled with all the useless and forgotten things, sometimes scary things that end up in an attic. But it's usually what I've held on to, like emotions, physical items, anger for anything and everyone. The tiny things that upset you during the week. Um, but the light from that little fan in the attic still filters through. It's still there, but it kind of, everything's kind of like a scary attic. And that's what I feel like on the inside. But when I meditate or reflect, it's like a cleaning, but it's cleaning kind of like with one of those little grabbers. You can't you can't go in and just take the big boxes out. You can only do it little by little. And with each item, you have to care for it or dispose of it properly. And the more that I meditate, practice, and reflect, the more open that attic is for the big window light to touch every inch of the room. And it has to be done regularly, and you have to reflect regularly. Otherwise, you end up with that scary attic, and it controls how you interact with others, and then you can't see your own light, so how can you see the light in others? The other way that I mostly experience it is in the face of adversity. I often experience the light after I've had a negative interaction or negative experience with someone that I don't feel like I can relate to. I read something or I hear something or see someone act in a way that I just think, why? Why would you do that? But there is a why. There's a reason. And after years of practicing mindfulness, unfortunately, my first reaction usually is what I call the pufferfish reaction. I just go, and I want to say something, and I want to immediately react. And the next reaction, because I've learned to pause, is to immediately think what makes us the same and try to understand where they're coming from, even if it seems so awful what they're saying or doing, because no one thinks that they're being a bad person. No one thinks that they're actively trying to hurt others. Maybe they are, but I don't want to believe that. I want to see their light. I want to be able to connect with them and wish them that they're well. And that's how I practice it or experience it, is that I immediately have to stop and say, what makes us the same? We're both human. We're both breathe. We both want to experience love. And those are the things that help me experience the light, or how I experience it in a regular, normal way.
Tobin sent me a message privately, but I think he meant it for everybody. And he said, seeing and hearing beneath the surface and beyond distinctions that divide us. And when I got that, my thought was, when the light goes on, the distinctions go away, and we realize that they were only shadows anyway.
Well, thank you, friends. It looks like we've come to the end of our hour. And so now we'll settle into worship.